Hello and welcome everyone to the 7th appointment of the IFAD Innovation Talks. Today we will be focusing on how our agencies in the private sector are employing results, evidence, and targeted investments to ensure that our decisions and initiatives are contributing to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Today's event is being run jointly by IFAD's Change Delivery and Innovation Unit, the Operational Policy and Results Division, and the Treasury Services Division in collaboration with the Asian Development Bank, Enel Green Power, FAO, and the UNDP SDG Impact Team. Thank you so much for your collaboration. Before we start, I would like to remind you that today's event is being recorded. By joining the event, you are agreeing to the recording taking place and for it to be shared in our platforms. As usual, due to time limitations and our aim to focus on content, I won't be introducing in detail our speakers. So this is an invitation to visit our event page to check the speaker profiles and the event's concept note and agenda. John has shared with you the link in the chat box, so please click on the link and visit our event page. Without much further ado, I am honored to welcome IFAD's Vice President, Dominik Ziller, to deliver the opening remarks. Dominik, the floor is yours.
Distinguished guests, it is a pleasure for me to welcome you again to IFAD's Innovation Talks on behalf of IFAD. Today, we reflect on how tracking results and targeted impact investing can drive efforts towards the achievements of the SDGs. Since the adoption of the SDGs in 2015, we've seen that great strides have been made towards their achievement. But we have also seen that many goals have remained off track, or that progress achieved has even been reversed due to climate change, due to conflicts, and due to economic shocks, such as the shock that was created by the COVID pandemic. And statistics reveal the renewed challenges that we are facing now, in particular with regards to SDG 2. In 2020 alone, 811 million people in the world were facing hunger. So nearly 1 in 3 people, that is 2.37 billion people in total, did not have access to sufficient nutritious food. Also an increase of nearly 320 million people in just 1 year. So we can see the development is dramatic. The positive trend that we had towards achieving SDG 2 till about 2014, 2015 has first stalled and now been reversed, even before the pandemic hit. For many other SDGs, we are also struggling to keep on track. And yet, despite these bleak figures, we have been inspired by global movements and our beneficiaries themselves who demand us to do more for humanity, to do more for our planet. Unfortunately, the good intentions are not enough. We need to ensure that our decision makings, our actions, our investments are actively contributing towards human development and actively contributing to economic growth in a responsible and sustainable manner. For this to happen, we need to accurately monitor and analyze the performance of our intervention, and we need to enhance the quality and availability of data to help us identify problem areas, to track progress, and to increase accountability. At IFAD, we rely on 2 main instruments to report on our development effectiveness. There's the annual report on IFAD's development effectiveness. As we are very fond of acronym, we also have one for this, which is RIDE. And then there is the annual report on results and impact of IFAD operations, which obviously also comes with an acronym, which is Arico. The RIDE tracks IFAD's performance against the indicators and targets that we set out in the results management framework for each replenishment cycle. For example, on the percentage of women reporting improved quality of their diets, of the effectiveness of IFAD country strategies. The main objective of this RIDE report is to strengthen accountability and learning, as well as identifying systematic issues that need attention. ARI is issued by IFAD's Independent Office of Evaluation. It examines IFAD's overall program performance each year. The ARI, therefore, is, you could say, IFAD's principal external accountability tool, and it allows us to monitor the effectiveness of our work. We are actively mapping our results and performance against the SDGs, considering direct and indirect links as well as outputs and outcomes. We'll learn more about this during the event later today. I'm particularly looking forward to the interventions by our panelists and the closing remarks by Máximo Torero, Chief Economist at FAO, on ways that IFAD and other development organizations can improve our performance and reporting in the lead up to 2030. I would also like already today to invite you to join IFAD at COP26 in Glasgow, where we are hosting a pavilion. We will be emphasizing there the key role of small-scale producers in climate change adaptation and mitigation, and also in creating resilient food systems. Among other events, IFAD's Change, Delivery and Innovation Unit will host a share fair on how geospatial and remote sensing tools can help IFAD and its partners to decide on where adaptation investments are best needed and what impact these interventions will have. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today, and I wish you a successful and enriching event. Many thanks, and back to you, Gladys.
Thank you, Dominik, for your opening remarks and for highlighting IFAD's commitment to reporting at different levels to ensure adherence to IFAD's mission and the delivery of our commitments to IFAD's stakeholders. I am very pleased to welcome today's panel led by Lauren Phillips, Lead Advisor of IFAD's Operational Policy and Results Division. Lauren will be joining the panel by Smita Nakhooda, Senior Results Management Specialist at the Asian Development Bank, Natalia Toschi, Head of Funding at IFAD, Ruggero Arico, Head of Institutional Affairs at Enel Green Power and Vice President of Confindustria as Africa and Mediterranean, and by Belissa Rojas, Impact Measurement and Management Lead of the UNDP SDG Impact Team. Lauren, over to you.
Thank you so much, Gladys, and thank you to Dominik Ziller for the introduction. And I'm really happy to open the panel discussion today with such a wonderful panel of colleagues who are experts on the topic, which is, how are we going to, in the run-up to the SDGs, ensure that we can best track results, utilize evidence, and increase targeted investments towards the SDG. And so each of the panelists will be sharing their perspective about the ways in which innovations in their own work can lead to an increased degree of results, evidence, and impact for the achievement of the SDGs, together with partner governments and with other development actors. So without much further ado, I'm going to pass the floor to Smita, but I wanted to introduce the question that we've asked her to discuss today, which is how can employing results for the SDGs influence coordination across international, national, and local stakeholders? And can this have an impact on increasing both ownership and coherence of our efforts? Smita, over to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Lauren, and many thanks to you and IFAD colleagues for including me in this session and giving me a chance to reflect a little bit on this incredibly important evolving space. So I think what the SDGs have really done is offer the world a much needed common framework for helping us navigate complex challenges. And while we may have been set back in our progress towards many of the SDGs by the COVID-19 pandemic, the SDGs also present many of the hallmarks of a roadmap for the sorts of things that we need to keep in mind and continue to work towards as we recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, and really focus our attention on if we want to avoid future shocks of this nature, right? So I think that really has in many ways elements of the strengths and the challenges of the SDGs. It's a really comprehensive agenda, that there's something in there for everyone. And that's been great in terms of building ownership of the agenda, because there is something that all of us care about, either as individuals, as countries, as international institutions, embedded in this framework. And we're really trying to bring that into the ways in which we manage and position ourselves at the Asian Development Bank. I think the other thing that's been really powerful about the SDG framework is the diversity of stakeholders, including private sector companies and investors that have been finding value in this framework. And it's really great that we'll get to hear more from colleagues like Ruggero at Enel and Belissa at UNDP, who've really been trying to, engage on this from complementary perspectives in that regard. And when I try to think of where do I find optimism about the prospects on this, as well as caution, it is in that groundswell of interest that diverse stakeholders are finding in this framework. And I think that's really a testament to the kind of ownership and commonality that we begin to see as the framework gets traction despite setbacks 5 years after adoption of the goals. Now at ADB, we developed our strategy 2030 in 2019, 4 years after the SDGs had been adopted, and we put front and center in that strategy a commitment to help our developing member countries achieve the SDGs and related global commitments such as the Paris Agreement on climate change. Through our 7 operational priorities of Strategy 2030, which cover everything from inclusion and poverty related issues to food security and rural development to governance issues, we are actually supporting all 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals. So therefore, when we were developing our corporate results framework, translating that strategy into measurable indicators and targets, we really took extensive efforts to align those targets and indicators with the official SDG framework wherever possible. And in so doing, we really focused in on those direct links between our projects and the outputs that they would attain with the SDG targets and indicators associated with them. And we were able to do that because of the comprehensiveness of the scope of our strategy, which allowed a focus on direct linkages in that way, recognizing that there's going to be many ways in which we have catalytic effects at various levels of the SDG framework beyond those direct project level linkages that our framework is focused on. And I thought that was an interesting contrast with the way in which other institutions are developing this, where they're placing equal emphasis on those indirect linkages between their projects and those catalytic effects as the direct ones, right? And I think in many ways, this reflects the fact that each of us as stakeholders needs to find value in the SDG framework that reflects our mandate and our ways of working and our ways of doing business, while still embracing the commonality of the framework that the SDGs present. And I think we're really at a space now where we're seeing kind of a multitude of variations and approaches to doing that, right? And it's not simple or complex, but still it's a common framework, and we're all trying to translate that framework in ways that make sense in terms of our own results management approaches and the like. From our side at the ADB, we sought to articulate our approach to this in our first corporate report on our contributions to the Sustainable Development Goals, which we published earlier this year. And we're also working with other members of the Multilateral Development Bank community and development finance institutions to better understand some of the commonalities and differences in our approaches to aligning with the SDGs, so that we can continue to raise the bar on this and make sure that we're being ever more rigorous in terms of the ways in which we're linking our work to results that advance attainment of the SDGs, and really challenging ourselves to do better and to do more, to look at some of those tensions and trade-offs that are inherent in the agenda as part and parcel of our efforts to deliver development results, and also our efforts to engage with developing member countries about ways in which they can strengthen the focus on attainment of the SDGs in their national development planning and priorities. Because of course, as development finance institutions, we're just partners following the lead of those stakeholders at country level that really have to kind of set the goalposts on this. So let me leave it there, and I'm sure there'll be much more to discuss on this.
Thank you so much, Smita. That was very interesting. And I would also direct those who are listening's attention to the chat, where there's some links to some of the reports that Smita mentioned in her intervention. Now I'd like to pass the floor to Natalia Toschi from IFAD to answer a question on if she can provide more in-depth example of how the SDGs are tracked and how this can help to mobilize additional private resources. Natalia, over to you.
Thank you very much, Lauren. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me just share the screen. I've prepared just a very, very short deck. I have the honor and the challenge in 5 minutes to present IFAD's mapping methodology against the SDGs. So let me start with a top-down approach. This is IFAD. We're active in 5 regions. We have 203 ongoing projects in 93 countries, where IFAD put $7.5 billion USD and was able to mobilize additional resources so that the overall financing is 17.2 billion. So the question is indeed, to how many SDGs do we contribute through this activity? Well, you can see here straight away what we see as a result of our mapping methodology through our 6 project types, and by mainstreaming 4 themes that you see on the blue bar here. IFAD contributes to 15 out of 17 SDGs. So 15 out of 17 SDGs is evident that IFAD is far beyond just a green finance provider or a social finance provider. We are indeed a sustainable finance provider. Everything we do is sustainable development. We are what is called a pure player. We don't have any other side business. And
this is very evident through these results. Now, the question was indeed, how did we get to this assessment? Well, this is where the mapping methodology comes into play. IFAD tracks 45 what we call core indicators in its projects. We have 3 outreach indicators, 20 output indicators, and 22 outcome indicators. And you know how difficult it is to track outcome indicators efficiently and effectively. Each and every one of them is linked not only to an SDG goal, but further down to the SDG target that it contributes to. And as the colleague was saying before, we were able to track not only the direct contribution, so when an activity is a pure match with the SDG target description, but also the indirect contribution, which is a secondary benefit of the activity. And just to make sure that we were also able to make sure that the tracking methodology does not double count the contribution, which is of course always, you know, a preoccupation in the development world. So what is this useful for? Well, aggregation is the first level. And aggregations are a very important tool, and they shouldn't be a marketing tool. They should be essentially a tool to make sure that the institution steers into the right direction, that its contribution is tracked on a global level, that its activities are complementary and coherent with the other development partners. This is what aggregation allows us to do. So as the VP was saying at the beginning, you know, SDG 2 is very dear to IFAD's activity, and this just shows you on an aggregated level our contribution to SDG 2 that we were able to do through this tracking methodology. Now, how do we make this sustainable within IFAD? And when I say sustainable, I mean, how do we make sure that it's actually feasible and implementable? Well, here, automation is, of course, the key word. We have to make it simple and automated for colleagues that actually work on the ground. So IFAD's results management system, the operational results management system, is fully equipped to do that. It was enhanced to do it, whereby every project's log frame, so logical framework, is actually uploaded in the system, and automatically the core indicators and the links to the SDGs are already there, so that when we have the targets and the actual results, we can do automatic aggregation through the systems. Now, why is this so important for us, and especially for me as head of funding? Well, as some of you know or may know, IFAD is getting ready to issue private placements next year, and we are targeting, of course, ESG and private impact investors. And we've created our own sustainable development finance framework. And for the ones that are familiar with the ICMA, for elements of the green bonds, social bonds, or sustainable finance principles, what is very, very important for impact investors is the number 4, so the reporting. So our reporting will be 100% based off the mapping methodology, whereby our impact investors will see how the proceeds of their bonds actually contribute to the SDGs, to how many SDGs and what kind of tangible contribution they're making by investing in IFAD. So I leave it at that. Just leaving you with 4 key messages. We really were able to track results and bring it to the next level, because IFAD has been tracking results for 4 decades before any of these ICMA frameworks came into place, before the SDGs were formulated. But it was a push for us to bring it to the next level and to be part of the international community in a much more coherent way. With that, I think I kept the time and very happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalia. And you did keep the time, so that gives us the chance to pass to our colleague Ruggero Arico, who is going to answer a question for us specifically about mobilizing investments, so to pick up on where Natalia ended. So the question that we're going to pose is, how can tracking the SDGs mobilize new investments aimed at the most urgent social and environmental priorities and policies? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Let me start by thanking you, Gladys and IFAD, for setting up such an inspiring talk and for having invited me. I have the chance actually to work for Enel Green Power, which is nowadays the biggest renewable energy private player in the world. So we can picture exactly what's going on in our sector in any corner of the planet, and how crucial will be the energy transition in the next years, and how crucial will be for the private sector actually to take into account the SDGs. Firstly, we can easily affirm that private companies can and should nowadays align as much as possible any project, any policy, and any activity to the SDGs. That is what we do in Enel, actually. We have changed drastically our business model so that we take into account, before approving any project, the social and the environmental impact on the territories. So in fact, we measure the impact of any activities to any SDGs, and we calculate how virtuous actually we have been vis-a-vis our commitment to the SDGs. In our case, we identified the 4 strategic goals that our performance actually is measured by. The number 13, which obviously represents the biggest challenge and opportunity. Enel has consolidated its leadership in the energy transition by accelerating the decarbonization process. And this has led us to a considerable reduction of emissions, almost 80% of reduction by 2030. The number 7, which means that in the next 3 years, we will invest roughly 17 billion euros in renewables, which is a huge amount of money. And this will lead us to have a total renewable capacity of almost 70 gigawatts by 2023. Again, a huge number. The SDG number 9, which means that we'll invest 16 billion euros in infrastructure and networks in the next 3 years. And finally, the number 11, because we are investing in a series of new electrification services. For example, we will place almost 800,000 electric vehicle charging points by 2023 and almost 50 million of new smart meters. So a part of these goals, which are obviously strategic for us, concretely, what we do is that we deal with our projects with all the SDGs in the territories. For instance, I can give you the example in Africa. Concerning SDG number 4, we have funds that aim to benefit individuals from disadvantaged communities who achieve target school marks, or SDG number 3 and 6, in areas where we have a water shortage, where water shortage is critical. We have installed a system that can filter up to 70 billion liters of clean drinking water to the surrounding households per year. Or number 2, we have a nutrition program that basically collects food that is close to reaching its sell-by date from the retailers to supply to the school feeding schemes and indigent families. So in every country, region, and village where we go, we try to act responsibly towards the commitments. So this model that we have, that you see behind me, which is the CSV, which means creating shared value, is a kind of a new paradigm that aims to pursue business success by benefiting society. So any kind of attempt to create shared value enable companies to expand from one side their business, but on the other side to become more attractive to investors. Sustainable finance, it was mentioned, refer to the process of having the ESG consideration into the account when we make investment decision in the financial sector. And at the end of the day, this reveals that companies are not the problem, but must be part of the solution. Given that in our case, Enel has a long history of operating in global bond markets, and again, Natalia was mentioning that, in 2019, we issued the world's first general purpose bond linked to the SDGs, which was successfully placed around $1.5 billion on the US market. And this year, in 2021, we placed a triple tranche of 3.25 billion euros of sustainability-linked bond, which was oversubscribed. And this was the largest sustainability-linked transaction ever priced in the fixed income capital markets. So the SDG commitments in the private sector can move nowadays a huge amount of money. But my last point is that in order to do that, in order to let the private sector invest, especially in countries which are geographically and culturally very far or different, we need to have a proper regulatory, legislative, and policy framework in no matter which sector. In our case, what I do as global head of institutional affairs is to work very closely to governments on a daily basis with institutions, multilateral organizations, development banks, in order to build up a proper framework which works for no matter investors or company size, but which is super fundamental in order to let the private sector feel comfortable with one existing on one side and one clear on the other side set of rules. And for my sector, for the green energy projects and infrastructure, the public-private partnership has become actually the most valuable instrument. So having said that, we are more than happy to cooperate with IFAD on our sector and to boost as much as we can renewable energies, as we believe, and we all have to believe, that the world's future will be necessarily renewables. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ruggero. That's very inspiring and a large set of numbers. And so I wanted to close our panels by inviting Belissa to answer a question from her perspective about whether or not we should be only impressed by these numbers or also see maybe something of caution in them. And so the question we'd like to pose to you, Belissa, is what is the outlook for impact investing, and how can the SDG performance monitoring prevent what we call impact washing? So Belissa, let me turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, first, I'm very happy to be here today and honored to be part of this amazing panel. I already learned a lot, so I will do my best to answer this very important question. I was reflecting, about the question and the outlook for impact investing. And this might be controversial, but I'm really towards moving away from impact investors in the following sense. I think it was Dominik who talked about, the crisis we're facing and the unsustainable practices. And basically, if we think about the unsustainable practices and the SDGs, the financing gap to achieve the SDGs has only increased, especially after the pandemic. So we were reflecting a lot at SDG Impact. Okay, we need to channel more capital towards the achievement of the SDGs and everything, for example, what Natalia was saying, right? Alignment and going towards action, and Ruggero also was saying the same. And then, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Once that capital is aligned, for us, we're really focused on how you manage it in such a way that the likelihood of having impact increases. And so far, nothing new. That's what we're doing. But then if we think about what is causing the problems, right? We don't want to achieve those targets, so we have new ones, right? Or more problems are coming. And in that sense is that I'm saying, and I said at the beginning, what if we leave impact investing as a specific type of investing, as an add-on or a different category, and we dare to dream about really changing the system. And what that means is really about changing the way we do business and the way we invest. But change it how? What is this new normal we all talk about? So for us at UNDP, what we believe is that we just need to move from the current system to a decision-making, I go back to a world where decisions are made in a way that it embeds impact considerations in the way those decisions are made. Okay, so just the way we do business, the way we invest, what's the new way? Okay, we embed impact considerations. So basically we have financial and economics, environment and social at the same level, as important. We just redefine success, right? So success goes beyond dollars, that's it, right? So the maximization is different. So in that sense, I invite you to dream with us. Let's get rid of impact investing. Let's just redefine drastically and change the system. Okay, so I'm all for impact, but big time. And then, okay, that's very linked to the next question. Okay, we need to really avoid impact washing, SDG washing, ESG washing, and all the washings. And our focus, and I'm an economist, I was an impact specialist and advisor for many, many years in a development bank. So of course, evaluation performance is very important. Right? We have targets, we measure to see if we are close to achieve it or not. And what I really like about that is it also allows you to take corrective actions along the way, right? It's ex ante, you monitor, and then you see what happened and you learn. But we have challenges, and we know that. I think, Natalia, you were talking about the outcomes, right? That the outcomes are very difficult to measure, right? Sometimes the intervention happens at a point and the outcomes come very, very late when everybody forgot about the project or the intervention. So that's one challenge. Sometimes there's limited information. So many times we need to make a lot of assumptions about, okay, assuming all this, then this is, the impact, I think, right? These assumptions change. It's not that easy to just, fix that and not even talk about attribution, right? If we really know that we are achieving that impact. So what we are suggesting is, okay, that data is important, but there are limitations about what that data can give you. So we need also information about practice, about management. So we have developed at SDG Impact something called the SDG Impact Standards that cover private equity, bond issuers, and enterprises. And we also have worked with OECD for the standards for sustainable finance. And basically, in a nutshell, this is all about how you take decisions to maximize the likelihood to have impact and reporting on that, because when data is limited, what do we want? We want to take decisions considering the risk of taking that decision, given the limited information, and manage that risk, so we avoid any negative impacts. So I invite you to take a look at that. We are also developing assurance. So in a nutshell, to avoid impact washing, report on impact practice and impact performance, and together you might have a better picture. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Belissa, and I liked your call for all of us to dream big. Let me try to just summarize a little bit of what I heard across our very excellent group of speakers, and try to pull it together before we start to address the questions. And that will also give all of you who are listening a bit more time to put some more questions in the box. I've seen 2 there, and I'm sure that there will be others. So I'm really inspired by the amount of uniformity we have in the discussion amongst all of these different types of actors. And it made me think that I know that in development, the new thing is always the best thing, right? But in all of the discussion made me think back about the Paris Agenda and the Declaration for Aid Effectiveness, which was written in 2005, right? Which had some principles and some organizing principles for all of us, which was to increase the ownership of aid, the alignment of aid, harmonization. Those are usually the 3 that people mention. But there was also 2 other things, which was results and mutual accountability. Now, perhaps belatedly, but it seems to me like from what we've heard today, the SDGs and the sort of the phenomenon that has been caused by having very clear objectives, and then under that targets and indicators, has done a lot of the things that we hoped the Paris Declaration would spurn in 2005. And I think that Smita gave a lot of reasons why that might be the case, right? So because they have a broad scope, right? There's 17 goals, and the goals have all sorts of different objectives because they turned out to have been widely applicable to the development challenges that countries are facing, and they think of those challenges in a comprehensive way. They have gained traction and support across a broad number of actors, right? This is really important beyond just the traditional aid community, but private. We're obviously seeing that reflected in the comments that we had from Natalia on the funding side, or Ruggero on the private actor side, or even some of the things Belissa was saying. And they've allowed us to leverage through the hard work of many who have found a way to operationalize the financial needs that come with achieving these objectives into a very big and expanding set of financial interests. So I think that this is a great testimony to the fact that we can work together to have highly owned at the national level, aligned and harmonized framework, which has strong results focus and focuses on mutual accountability. Now, what will come next, right? I really liked, some of the ideas here, because we're in a countdown to the SDGs. That's the title of this innovation talk. So we have, less than 10 years left to achieve these objectives. And the agenda is very large. And as several of the speakers mentioned, we're falling behind on a number of these objectives. Actually, if I read a recent report by the Jeffrey Sachs and co-authors, the one that's furthest behind is actually the objectives related to inequality. But SDG 2 on zero hunger is very close in terms of falling behind. And so I think what comes next, changing the system or considering these SDGs from the start. I really appreciated what Ruggero said about how Enel is looking at the SDGs from the start, being a pure player in the way that Natalia mentioned IFAD is trying to do, or as Smita mentioned, the ADB, catalyzing across all 17 SDGs. And so I think that there were a lot of very important messages from our speakers about the way that we could measure success, the ways that we can continue to focus investment. And I think the big remaining question is how can we ensure that all of the efforts that we heard about today have a high degree of country level ownership, and that our efforts as actors, whether in the private or the public sphere, are mirrored by, picked up by national governments who are the ones who have to deliver on the achievement of the SDGs. And I believe some of the questions in the chat, in fact, go to exactly this point, which is how can we ensure that there's government ownership for these agendas that we've been discussing? I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Lauren. I think that the audience will agree with me that that was a very impressive display of data that the panelists shared with us today. Now I would like to shift our attention to our audience and invite to the floor Ashley Davidson, Program and Strategy Analyst at IFAD, and all of our speakers so that they can address the questions from the audience. So let's start with the first question that we have in the Q&A box. And the most voted question is from Xingyi Yang. She's asking, as a practitioner, I understand that the need for impact evaluation and performance to attract investment. However, I am unaware of any methodology or framework or practical guidance on how to implement it. Capacity building activities on how to perform the evaluation and reporting would be good. Could you point us to the relevant resources? Lauren, would you like to address this question or direct it to the panel, please?
I think that maybe I could, Belissa started that question if she doesn't mind,
Yeah.
and then IFAD would be happy to complement. And I'm sure Smita might also, given her experience on coordinating across MDBs, might also add.
Yes, sure. Thank you. I was looking actually for a course that I could recommend for the audience. UNDP SDG Impact, we just launched in partnership with Duke University a course on IMM, Managing for Impact, that I'm going to share with the audience. I would, I think, take the question on the side because evaluation per se has a lot of resources, maybe not alignment, and there's a lot of questions about impact ratings. So I'm going to post some resources looking at IMP Impact Frontier, some Rockefeller Foundation documents that are really for private sector that is trying to measure better and having more performance evaluation tools. And the key question is really, how do you do the impact ratings? How you do the alignment? What do you exclude and where you're not? And some multilateral development banks are sharing. So I would share that with the audience. Is there anything else in the question that I missed? Because I was looking for the course to really send it. Let me know. Thank you.
No, I think that's great, Belissa. And I also wanted to refer people to the Global Evaluation Initiative, which is a World Bank initiative where many of us are participating. IFAD is participating, and our Independent Office of Evaluation is participating. And perhaps also Smita can say something about that. And to other partner organizations like 3IE that really focus on those kinds of issues, both for measuring impact on the SDGs and other areas. Smita, can I pass to you?
Sure. Just, I mean, one observation is that I think the whole space of SDG alignment and developing very detailed methodologies for this has been an iterative one for a lot of key players in this space, where it's taken a bit of trial and error and piloting to find a way that works given the systems that you do have in place for results management. So it's only now that we're beginning to see an increasing number of MDBs starting to kind of publish formally their approach to doing this, because you first have to kind of work within the system to test it before you can do that. So I would note that the Inter-American Development Bank, for example, have recently published their methodology for aligning projects with the SDGs. I mentioned already ADB's corporate report on the Sustainable Development Goals, which shows our approach on this. We're actually in the process of revising and updating our methodology this year to reflect on some of the learnings from 2 years of piloting our automated framework for linking sectors and themes to the SDGs. So we'll have a new methodology note that comes out next year. And there's a plethora of resources aimed at kind of helping private sector actors link their impact to the SDGs, including from initiatives like the Global Reporting Initiative and others. So, really a wealth of resources here. And I think the kind of course that Belissa alluded to give one an orientation is probably the type of thing you need, because we are in a space where there's just so much information out there that it's hard to know where to start sometimes. So.
Thank you. I think I saw that Natalia wanted to come in on this question as well.
Yes, thank you, Lauren. I also wanted to compliment, because as you know, as we were developing our mapping methodology ourselves, we've been liaising with the big sisters, like, for example, the World Bank. And what is evident, 2 points that I took home from these discussions. First of all, it's important to have a very detailed and analytical mapping methodology, but we have to strike the right balance between, the mapping that we want to do and the feasibility of the mapping itself. We have the SDGs that, as you said, in my view, strike the perfect balance between being accurate, but also being broad enough and applicable to the rest of the institutions. There are a lot of new taxonomies that are coming out, which make it very, very difficult at times to have matrices of of reporting. And the other thing that I wanted to say is that what has been very good for IFAD, a strength, is that we actually started by working hand in hand from scratch between finance and operations. We have, in a way, we had the advantage to be able to do so because we haven't issued so far. So when it comes to impact reporting, we literally started together from finance and operations. In other places where, of course, development actors and issuers started issuing far before the need to actually report against this called for a reverse engineering and tracking and crossing of databases that made it very, very difficult. So I think starting together and aligning to one database, to one reporting system for all purposes, which is both the impact reporting but also the results reporting for other purposes, is very, very key to have a successful framework in the end. Over.
Thank you so much. Gladys, would you like to organize us into the next questions, or shall I go for the one that I can see next, which is how can we integrate?
Yes, but I just would like to welcome FAO's Chief Economist, Máximo Torero. He's joining the Q&A session so that we can also address questions to him. Please go ahead, Lauren.
Thank you very much, and welcome, Maximo. It's nice to see you. The second question is, how can we integrate SDGs into national planning during this decade and in the context of COVID-19? And maybe I would, in fact, invite the Chief Economist from FAO to mention something about this, and then we'll see if others want to come in as well.
Thank you, Lauren. That's a difficult question. So, SDGs are a framework, and there are agencies which are custodian of those indicators and have approved methodologies to measure those indicators. I think that the most important step right now is to be able to increase the level of information that is needed to develop and to measure those indicators. And the COVID-19 has shown that still we have significant gaps of information that we need to have in place to be able to come with quick responses. Sometimes SDGs indicators are outdated because of the lack of data. And when you need real-time data to be able to react, that's a challenge. And that's, I think, a call of the importance of have real-time data information. Let me give you a concrete example. With COVID-19, people assume that the most vulnerable people will be the ones that were already in poverty. And that was not necessarily the case. There were new hotspots of food insecurity, of poverty and extreme poverty that were created because, for example, informality was destroyed by the lockdowns. And huge sectors of informality didn't have any more their income, and they were middle class because they got a significant income through the informal activities. And in Latin America, 70 to 60% of the labor force is informal. Now, those people were never touched through these mechanisms that were already there in place, the safety nets and so on and so forth. So again, having real-time information on where the new hunger or undernourishment hotspots were will have been ideal for governments to better allocate the restricted resources they had and to minimize the effects of COVID-19. In many cases, that didn't happen. And those are SDG indicators. In our case, is the FIES, that we're custodian food insecurity experience scale. And we couldn't do it. We couldn't do it because we didn't have the resources to deploy, despite we knew the methodology will work. We could do at the end 50 countries, but we wanted to do 135 or 140 countries. But that's one of the signals of the importance of having good data and real-time data. Thank you.
Thank you so much for a very comprehensive answer. And I think that was very useful to hear about the challenges also that we faced as agencies during COVID-19. There's a question which got voted up about IFAD's data collection and reporting methodology. I'm going to let my colleague Ashley post in the chat 2 places you can find that. And also recall that Natalia, while Natalia was speaking, we posted the link to the Sustainable Development Finance Framework. And so we'll repost those as places where you can find information. And then in the interest of time, I would like to take the question for Ruggero, for Mr. Arico. How can governments and multilateral actors, in your view, accelerate the clean and just energy transition? And how does the enabling environment for that look? Over to you, Ruggero.
Well, it's an interesting question, actually. I was trying to explain that in order to do that, when we talk about renewables and when we talk about the future that will be renewables, we need to have a clear set of rules that should be put in place by government and by institutions. So there is an important role that the private sector can do, which is to explain to institutions how is the proper structure that the regulatory framework should have place, and then the governments should implement this framework and let the energy transition become a reality. So the role of the governments are absolutely fundamental, because without having this clear set of rules, then it will be almost impossible to reach this energy transition. So obviously, we all need to work with them, but at the same table, we need to have the institutions, we need to have the business community, but also we need to have the civil societies and the academia, which very often they are completely forgotten. So in order to reach our final goal, all players should be seated at the same table. But obviously, the government played an important role of issuing the framework that should be needed in order to push this clean energy transition.
Thanks so much. That was very comprehensive. There's another question, and I think maybe Belissa would be the right one to answer this. So there's a question about data quality and due diligence processes, which says, which data quality and due diligence process will private investors require to feel comfortable with the information or results provided in SDG frameworks? And does IFAD's SDG framework have these quality assurance measures in place? And I would let Natalia come in on that last part if she's willing, but let's pass to Belissa first for the more general question.
Thank you, Lauren. It's a very difficult question, but there's some good news. I believe that we're still learning, right? So investors, I would say, are demanding more, but exactly what should they be demanding? Is that the right things? It's still in process, right? Work in progress. So I would say that this is a moment where we're both influencing each other. And I believe that development finance institutions, and including the UN, OECD, and IFAD and ADB, are doing a lot of effort to share their frameworks. And we have years, decades of experience in evaluation, right? So I think what I would do is really first, review material, get informed, but also remembering what is the question we're trying to answer. Because there's a lot of confusion out there. ESG, responsible investment, impact, SDGs now. So it's really important to understand in the spectrum of the possibilities of influencing and impacting, where is my fund, or where do I want my fund or my company to be? Is it ESG risk for financial materiality and investment value? Is it that we're trying to act to avoid significant harm? Is it that we're trying to contribute to solutions? So really understand where our values and our goals fit. And based on that, you can look and say, okay, which framework is going to help me responding to this? And what are the investors that are aligned to what I want to do? Because that's the success for the long term. Of course, if you're asking my dreams, look at the due course that I just said and lots of materials and move the needle up. But the reality is that we're influencing each other, we're learning. And I believe that our first duty is to get informed and trust ourselves. Ask the right question, because there's lots of confusion. And we need to trust that if we ask the right questions and the answer is not clear, chances are we don't know yet. And then we build it together. Thank you, Lauren. I hope this helps.
Thank you so much. Natalia, did you want to answer the part about IFAD?
Yes, thank you very much. And I also wanted to complement what I just heard, which is very pertinent. So in terms of IFAD Sustainable Development Finance Framework, you know that there are all of these companies out there that provide what are called second-party opinions, right? So you saw that in March last year, the ICMA issued the new recommendations, whereby they recommend, they don't oblige, but they recommend everyone who has a framework to actually get a second-party opinion, which is an independent opinion of the validity of what is said essentially in the framework. The position that IFAD took, which is similar to the one that other development actors took, is that we've been doing this for 40 years. We've been results reporting for 40 years. Now, the second party opinion is something that has flourished very much so, especially in the green bonds principle and in the green issuances, because there are really climate experts that check everything that is in the framework and how this aligns. Whereas in the social part, or in the broader, so to speak, sustainable part, the position that we took is that we, for the time being, would not have a second party opinion. Because we believe that it's not a given that an outside company knows more about the development business that IFAD has been into for 40 years. But I also wanted to come back to the point which I think resonates a lot to us, which is the mutually influencing part between the issuer and the investors. what's clear is that, of course, the investors run all sorts of due diligence on the issuer. They look at the credit ratings, they look at the financial stability. But I think us as issuers can also have an influence, whether in the way that we choose to partner with some investors and choose to not partner with other investors. So IFAD is building a very strong due diligence process on the investor names itself, because we want to partner with investors that are aligned and with our mission and with our priorities.
And Natalia, I'm sorry, I have to.
Oh, sorry.
You.
Go ahead. I was rambling on. I'm sorry.
No, you were rambling at all, but it was an excellent and very comprehensive answer. We've run out of time for Q&As, but I wanted to remind audience members that they can still post questions, but that we would answer them at post-event space. And I have the chance to ask Máximo Torero, please, to help us close this discussion and to provide some closing remarks. So over to you. Thank you very much, Máximo.
Sorry, Lorena. I would actually like to offer some background to our audience by introducing Máximo. So Máximo's major research work lies mostly in analyzing poverty, inequality, the importance of geography, and private and public assets in explaining poverty and in policies oriented towards poverty alleviation, based on the role played by infrastructure, institutions, and technological breakthroughs or discontinuities in improving the welfare of households and small farmers. So we're very honored to have Máximo here with us today, and Máximo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gladys, and thank you, Lauren, and thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, Sustainable Development Goals have provided us with a framework for UN agencies and all partners and stakeholders to move forward with common objectives. But it's just a framework, and there are missing gaps there that we need to fill. Many things that has been discussed today not necessarily fit there, but at least we have a starting point. Even prior to the onset of the pandemic, the world was off track to achieve SDGs. Now, due to the COVID pandemic, an unprecedented health and economic social crisis are threatening lives of livelihoods, making the achievement of SDG indicators and targets even more challenging. Our SOFI, that we work together with IFAD and with other agencies, estimated that between 720 and 811 million people in the world face hunger in 2020, as many as 161 million more than 2019. The same happened with extreme poverty. We lost a decade in terms of the increase of extreme poverty. And nearly 2.37 billion people did not have access to adequate food in 2020, and 3 billion people don't have access to healthy diets. In the case of FAO, we are the custodian of 21 SDG indicators and contributing agency for 5 indicators. As the custodian agency, the organization is leading the development of new statistical methodologies and coordinating the dissemination of relevant documentation. But there are 2 elements when we look at these indicators. One is data, which is the raw data that we need to have to be able to implement those indicators. And the second component is the statistics, is when we process this data. Of course, as it has been said, the quality of the data matters and matters a lot, but also the analysis and interpretation of the data matters a lot. Overseeing data collection from national statistical agencies, which is the only way we can do it sustainably, and its aggregation and dissemination is central, but it requires to put in place capacities and capabilities. It requires to put in place controls and quality controls so that we have the best possible data to calculate these statistics and these indicators. Promoting the adoption of internationally agreed statistical methods, standards, and coordinating statistical capacity development initiatives in support of SDG monitoring is central. And coordinating inputs for the preparation of annual global and regional progress reports is also central. Now, in most of these cases, these reports not necessarily will look at the causal link. It will look at the contribution. It will look at how all these multiple indicators are contributing to be able to achieve a goal. And we need to understand as such. These are partial equilibrium views of the situation. These are not general equilibrium views. In few cases, we are able to get into the general equilibrium and to look at all the dynamics and to be able to have a more holistic and comprehensive assessment. But that's not normally the case in the case of the SDG indicators. As we heard from most of the speakers, the measurement of SDG indicators is key. It will support evidence-based decision-making for sustainable investments and the transformation of the agri-food systems. It will help assess the impact of our interventions. It will raise awareness on the challenges facing agri-food systems, example through the state of work collection. But let me only clarify one element here, because we at FAO keep talking about agri-food systems and most of the people talk about food systems. The reason why we bring the word agri is because agriculture is not only food. Agriculture is also fibers, is also biofuels, energy, and has many other dimensions which also create income that allows people to have access to food. So it's a combination of both food and the agricultural sector, which is important in the food systems, and that's why we call it agri-food systems. It's important also to monitor progress in the implementation of global and regional initiatives. It's important to mobilize all stakeholders on the achievement of the SDGs, because this is something that has been agreed, although it's aspirational. And it could be that many of those SDG indicators and the targets that we have in place won't be achieved by 2030, but at least the important thing is to be on path and on track and trying to see how much we can accomplish in the 9 years left that we have. As we heard from Ruggero, the role of private sector is vital for implementation of the 2030 agenda. But to make also the private sector to have more attractiveness towards the rural areas, for example, we need to provide indicators and information for them. Not always they will do the collection of raw information to be able to make decisions to enter or not in certain types of investments. So the more governments and statistical agencies and us as institutions that are working to achieve the Agenda 2030, working collecting information to be able to clarify the panorama and to be able making attractive investments of the private sector will be important. And at the end, what we want is to create competition of the private sector. So if they have to come and they have to do some blending to be able to enter to an area which is more risky, they will compete for the minimum blending. And that's what the information will help them to do. That's the best way to attract different players and to define the minimum blending that we need for them to come and to play a role. New SDG indicator framework for the private sector is a good step forward in that sense. It improves accountability frameworks and facilitates the implementation of the SDG target 12.6. I would like also to emphasize on UNDP's point regarding the reporting on both impact and performance to maximize our contribution to the SDGs. And here is important that we have to do a lot more than what just the SDG indicator tells me. The SDG indicator is giving me a partial photograph. But if we are going to look at the impact and performance and attribution, we need to work a lot deeper. And I think in IFAD, you're doing a great job in impact evaluation. And that's something that we need to learn from. And it's something that we need to try to figure out how we can scale up into other agencies so that we can accompany the results of the SDG indicators with impact evaluations to see which interventions could be scalable. And that's still a challenge because we don't know yet how are the impacts of replicability or scaling up interventions. We sometimes only know the impact of an intervention in a specific location, but the external validity and the scalability of that intervention and what are the different levels of impact that we will achieve because of the change of the environment is not yet clear. And there is a lot of work to do in that sense. I do believe that there is plenty of opportunities to accelerate achieving the SDGs in the next 9 years. I am optimistic. We at FAO are working intensively with the Hand in Hand initiative, which has created a data lab also to adapting new technologies and digital technologies, artificial intelligence to be able to close the gaps when data is not there. And it was an extremely useful tool during COVID-19 because it allowed us to bring a lot of real-time data that normally we could not have. So we need to keep innovating and accelerating the process. Most of our activities in hand, for example, are data intensive, geospatial data intensive, and has allowed us to help governments to identify areas where interventions could happen. And for example, where interventions that can move households or individuals from $1 or $1.5 PPP per day per capita to $7 or more per day per capita, which for us is a way to move sustainable out of poverty. So the primary objective here is how we can become more effective, how we can be more efficient to create transformation that we want to be able to get and achieve the SDGs by 2030. Innovation, digitalization, data, real-time data of good quality, statistics will be central. But it's also important to have institutionality behind, to have what we call the complements, which is governance, institutions, and capabilities. Capabilities are central. So it's not just collecting the data, it's working with governments and countries so that they can collect their own data and do their own analysis and interpret properly the data. Let me just finish that saying that the quality of the interventions we do and the effectiveness and cost effectiveness of the interventions we do in countries that we are touching, which are the poorest countries, where they have a huge budget constraint, are central. And we have to be as careful as possible in the recommendations we provide. The last thing we want is to give recommendations that would make farmers and countries to waste what they're doing. For example, normally in agriculture, we provide fertilizer packages to people. We provide seeds packages. And in most cases, those fertilizers are not responding to the needs of the soils because they are not soil maps. So we need to find ways in which we can improve the quality of information so that our recommendations are the best. And we are touching lives of people. Therefore, we need to be as effective and as scientific as possible, and with the highest possible standards, so that we minimize the miss and wrong policy advice, because the people we're touching are the people that has the less resources. So again, thank you so much for inviting me. And I think this has been a great panel, and I am very happy to be here. And I hope we can keep moving into improving the analysis and the data and the way we work together, so that we can, at the end of the line, provide the best possible advice to governments and to the households that are in such a need to be able to achieve SDG 2, SDG 1, and in our case also SDG 10, which is inequalities, but all the Agenda 2030. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Maximo, for your closing remarks and for highlighting the importance of enhancing our efforts to improve data availability, quality, and our overall capability for data analysis, visualization, and data sharing and governance. Before we close today's event, I would like to invite you to our next appointment of the IFAD Innovation Talks, which will take place on 29 November in partnership with IFAD's East and Southern Africa Division, Academia 2063, and IFPRI. The title of our Innovation Talk in November is Boosting Intra-African Agricultural Trade to Build Resilience of Small-Scale Farmers. John is sharing with you in the chat the registration link for that event. We will also be sharing with you through the IFAD Innovation Network the registration link for our COP26 side events, and particularly for the one in collaboration with partner agencies such as FAO and the European Space Agency on just the topics that Maximo was describing. Thank you to all of our speakers and partners, and to our team behind the screens, Georgia Sonino, John Laird, and Oliver Mundi, for their great work. And a special thanks to Lauren Phillips, not only for her contributions to today's event, but also for everything she has done to enhance IFAD's capacity in our operational policy and results division. Lauren is leaving IFAD, unfortunately, but we hope we will continue collaborating with her in her new role at FAO. With this, I would like to close today's event, and thank you and see you in November. Have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.